I'm not even sure I remember playing this game. It's been a while. Backbone is a self-described post-noir dystopian story-based game where you play as Howard Lotor, a private investigator who is also a raccoon, who gets pulled into a story much larger than what appears on the surface. The game starts with the typical private eye adventures for Howard as he searches to find if a husband has been cheating on his wife to capture evidence to prove so either way. Classic noir setup where the wife wanders into the dusty shop of a man who's barely scraping by, contemplating his own life decisions that led him to that point where he is taking pictures of cheaters for a wage. The game is all based around some of the tropes of the noir genre, at least at the forefront of the game. As you search through the city, you come upon characters Howard has a history with, such as Anatoly, the fatherly beaver who acts as your transport and general do-no-gooder that can live between the lines of the law while also having a large family at home to take care of as well. Or Larry, a fellow raccoon whose life has fallen on hard times through addiction and who now lives in the homeless community under the bridge. These characters are at the central intersection of gameplay and story, as really the only thing that the game has for you to do is interact with them. It's all based around the conversational flow that you have between these different characters and how you want to shape Howard as a player control character through the plot. Do you want him to be more violent, angry, or aggressive? Then you can choose those dialogue options to match. Do you want him to be more understanding or empathetic? Then you have those dialogue options for that, and so on and so forth. Now, there's two problems with this design choice in this game. The first problem is that there's basically no gameplay outside of the dialogue options, which means that the dialogue needs to be really good in order to hold the attention of the player, since there is little to offer outside of that. Well, actually, I guess that's not entirely true. There is the beautiful pixel art graphics and a pretty killer soundtrack to go along with the game, but outside of the dialogue, there's not a lot of straight gameplay to take on. Also, many games offer good dialogue while also giving you branching options for your character, for the wider plot of the game, or puzzles to solve, something more. Backbone doesn't offer any of these options really to you. There might be some variation in the conversation itself, but regardless of how you react to what is happening within the conversation, the same outcome is always coming at the end of the game. You might be able to paint your understanding of the situation more or less depending on how you approach each conversation, but it makes no difference in the actual events of the story. So it makes me wonder, why even bother? I don't think that every game needs to have some perfectly branching dialogue options or a so-and-so will remember that system like the Telltale games of yesteryear. But when there's no other gameplay offerings that the game gives you, it feels like there needs to be another system added in to make the game worth it. The second problem is that if the story inside this game was endlessly interesting, it would be totally worth it to sift through the dialogue. But the storyline of this game also leaves something to be desired. The game has you start off with a simple investigation, only to find that Clarissa Bloodworth, central mob lady boss and purveyor of the local night scene club, is actually murdering other animals to feed to the upper tier levels of animals in their society. The society is a simple caste system with the animals that are scavengers, like rodents, on the bottom, and the more majestic animals, like lions or apes, on the top. But apparently, the top tier of animals have begun to develop a taste for the flesh of the lower tier animals. This is presented as essentially cannibalism, although in practical terms of the animal kingdom, it does kind of make logical sense. But I think it's more meant as a criticism of those in power who see the lower classes as something to exploit and take advantage of, even to the point of eating their own flesh simply because they decided that it tasted good. It's not like anyone's going to stop them, so there's no problem with it in their minds. We see that many people throughout the supply chain of this flesh are complicit with the illegal trade. So even though Howard is disgusted at the revelation of it at first, it seems like the story moves on rather quickly from this idea of flesh eating. You do see other examples of exploitative business practices as well, such as the slums where the lower classes live, the long work hours of the mother of a girl who has disappeared, and the idea of a revolution or rebellion starting to form underneath the surface. All of that is all well and good in the story, but the problem is that the story just fully abandons all these ideas. Renee, the reporter and main confidant and love interest, I guess, of Howard, is supposedly writing a story about what he is discovering, but as the story progresses, nothing really comes from it except for a hint at what may come in the future. either to set up a sequel or just to leave what happens open-ended, because coming up with a real ending is probably just too gosh darn hard. The first half finds you investigating, questioning witnesses and family members, sneaking into upper-class neighborhoods and homes, and trying to discover the root of this flesh-eating conundrum. But then, Howard goes into the science sector of the city, and things take a sharp left turn that I don't think anyone was really expecting. So I guess we're getting into like big spoilers now. In Science City, Howard gets a weird black goo ball that is being studied secretly, and it attaches itself to him. It melds with his mind and body and is beginning to change his shape and his mind as time goes on. The story goes from neo-noir to science fiction very, very quickly. When this first happened, I borderline thought it was going to be like a drunken dream sequence that Howard was going to wake up from, but no. Instead, this knockoff symbiote has actually infected him. What follows is a series of dreamlike wanderings where you straight up murder someone who's essentially your only friend. Oh, and also that's like never mentioned again. Like you kill Anatoly and no one even says anything. Like he might as well have just been a bug on the wall since no one even says his name afterwards, I don't think. Howard doesn't even seem to feel bad, like what the actual fuck? Like he's the one relatable character who's close to you. And sure, it was foreshadowing that he was going to die for the whole time because he keeps talking about his kids. But still, I mean, like, what the fuck? You have these like weird baseless conversations with the goo itself inside your head, and there is this lovely little section in a homeless camp that almost feels like home. But the choice to include this goo feels random. It has nothing to do with Bloodworth or any of the other characters that we've met so far. It has nothing to do with the dynamic power imbalance that was sort of at the heart of the setting of the game. It has nothing to do with anything other than it just happened to be something that Howard stumbled upon in his investigation. It just feels really stupid. And I thought as the game went on, it would explain more about this goo and how maybe that's what gives the apes their power, or how it connects to Bloodworth, or how it matters at all. But simply put, none of that happens. Instead, we get a research section where experiments are completed on Howard by Bloodworth scientists, and then they just let him go, and he sort of just wanders off. It's clear that the goo is having a big-time negative effect on the psyche, but it still felt strange that Howard comes up with a silly escape plan and he gets to just walk off. This, in turn, leads to the narrative just falling apart. There's just too many things that are never explained or never really touched on after they're mentioned one time. They introduce all these new elements and do nothing to explain them or try to tie them back into the original backbone. Oh, that's the name of the game. Of the game, which is this noir detective story. The ending left me wanting, but it also did not greatly frustrate me. I wish it was more fleshed out. I don't know if they ran out of time or budget for the game, but it feels like there was more potential both for the gameplay, especially in the second half of the game where every mechanic is forgotten for just dialogue, and the actual storyline as well. They mention Howard's mother repeatedly, but then it just never actually comes up in the game. They mention the wall and escaping the city, but that just goes nowhere. They mention monkey butt, some hip new street drug, and that goes nowhere. Oh yeah, and the flesh-eating thing, which was the entire plot, that just gets forgotten too at the end. They just don't talk about how the lions and the apes are eating the other animals' flesh. Let's just push that off to the side. The fantastic visuals and music don't make up for the negatives in the storyline and the mechanics. I would consider this game a miss for me. It is short, like around 5 hours long, so that's nice. It wasn't a huge time commitment. I played it on Game Pass, so that was also nice because I didn't spend money directly on it. But I wouldn't spend a dime on this game if I were you, which is disappointing because I thought that the game had promise. The last noir game I played was Genesis Noir, which I also fucking hated. That game is much, much worse than Backbone. But it seems like it's trendy to make these neo-noir indie games, and I think they just might not be a good premise as much as developers think they are. I think the next time I sit down to play some story-driven art piece indie game, I'm not going to lean into the noir type. It would be like repeatedly sticking my hand into the fire. But anyway, bye now.